Let's make ourselves a 40 non-sleeve deck box. In order to get started, you're going to need a few supplies. One is a cutting board for cutting with a utility knife. You're also going to need a pair of scissors, a scrub brush, the utility knife. You're also going to need some liquid glue, a pen, and a round electrical cover plate for creasing. Optionally, some pieces of plywood. Let's get started here with this one piece, one glue flap stencil. We're going to place it on top of this emptied box of chocolate Cheerios and try and find just the right place to start tracing. Looking at all four sides and everything in between, trying to find just the right spot, making sure everything lines up and nothing is crooked. Once you're happy with that location, firmly hold the stencil in place and start tracing it out, taking extra care to make sure that the stencil doesn't move at all during this process, and naturally that you make sure to cover every inch of the stencil with your trace marks so that nothing's missed when you're ready to start cutting. I'm coming around to the top front of the deck box now with the tracing, and I have the option to do the half circle, which I would just simply trace around it, or I can do the V shape. And in this instance, I'm going to do the V shape. So notice how I stop at the top of the half circle, go down to the middle, draw a little vertical line, and then carry on at the other end of the half circle, completing the rest of the tracing. What I'm going to do next after I take the stencil off is grab my ruler, and then I'm just going to join where those all three ends meet at the bottom of this little vertical line there, and then the top right of the half circle, and repeat it again with the top left of the half circle. That's going to give me my V shape, and now it's ready for cutting with my scissors. When it comes to cutting, I like to start off by getting rid of the extra pieces of paperboard that I'm not going to need, the big chunks that are just kind of in the way. So I cut them off first, and then I start working on the little details, cutting off all the way around the stencil. But obviously that's just the way that I like to do things. You can do this step however you like. The important thing is to make sure that you stay on the lines so that you get an accurately cut out deck box piece, and save the little parts that are hard to reach with the scissors for your utility knife, that you can clean up all these little loose ends once you're done cutting all the way around it. After giving it a final look over, noticing that everything's done, it's time to flip it over, grab my ruler, and start making some crease lines. These show me where I need to do the actual creasing. This first one that I'm going to do is for the rounded flap that's on the top of the deck box. I'm just going to use the little nubs that are at the base of the rounded flap. Then I'm going to draw a line across the top of the deck box, covering both side flaps and the base of the top. And then repeat the same thing again on the bottom side, using the little parts that I'm highlighting there along with the base. As I finish that up, I can flip it over and start working on my vertical lines. There's a little nub right here. I'm going to use that vertical part of it to line up with the right side of the top of the deck box and draw my first line. Then moving over to the other side of the flap, I'm going to use the vertical part of the second nub and the side of the bottom of the deck box to draw my second vertical line. That's the whole point of these nubs, is to help make these lines. Moving over to the other side with the box upside down, I'm going to again use the nub and the left side of the bottom of the box there. And I'm going to draw my third vertical line. Now all that's left is these tiny little corners that you'll see on your deck box piece. I'm going to line up with the end of those so that I can draw the vertical line for my glue flap. Once I've got that done, they're all in place. I'll give it a quick look over and make sure that they're nice and straight, and then I'm ready for creasing. Now it's time to get out the electrical cover plate, but first I'm going to want to cover it with a piece of scrap paperboard so that it's a little bit easier on my hand. And then I'm going to start creasing it, just rolling the electrical cover plate over top of these lines. You can see that my hand is shaking because I'm literally pushing as hard as I possibly can, which isn't as strong as if I'm standing up to do it, but for the sake of these videos I have to keep seated because I have no other way to hold my camera up. At any rate, just keep creasing over top of these lines that I've made with the pen, trying to stay as straight as I can while pushing down as hard as I can and then covering the entire area. As I struggle my way through the last crease, I can put the cover plate down, move the cutting board out of the way, and start folding everything over. As you can see, I'm using the table to help with the folding process to make sure that everything folds according to plan. And using my fingers, I feel along the folds to make sure that everything is creasing really nicely, and taking my time as I work through all of the different vertical flaps and folds. Then I can turn it sideways and I can start doing the top and the bottom as well as the two side flaps. Checking everything as I do it to make sure that it's folding just the way I want. Once that's all finished, it's time to get that cutting board back along with a scrub brush and start doing some scrubbing. Now on this bottom here, there are two side flaps that I'm going to be gluing to the inside of the box. And to scrub them, I put the electrical cover plate over the bottom of the deck box, and I have the ruler placed as you see it, and then I just start scrubbing. This makes sure that no areas of the future deck box that I don't want scratched will get scratched. And I just start scraping off the waxy surface that covers the outside of the box. I don't have to get it all off, just a good portion of it so that it has a good surface for gluing. Once I've got those two done, I can move the ruler to just past the crease line, and then I can start scrubbing the whole bottom rounded flap there as well until I'm happy with it. Once I've got that to my satisfaction, I can turn it over, and there's only one more flap left to do. That's the vertical glue flap. Once again, putting my ruler just past that creased edge, I give that a good scrubbing to get that waxy surface area off. And when I'm happy with that, then I can get that cleaned off and get it ready for the next part. Here's what it looks like all finished. Now that that's all finished, I want to do a dry fit. I'm going to fold everything around and see how the one end sits on top of the vertical glue flap here. Making sure that everything lines up nice, that the tops and the bottoms are fine, and that it's going to work really well together. Once I'm happy with that, I can get out my glue. Here I'm using a carpenter's glue, but you can use anything you like. And I'm only going to get enough on there to cover the surface area. I don't want any excess glue at all. Otherwise, it's going to squish out and get into places that I don't want it. So I carefully smear it into place with my finger, and I'm wiping off the excess on my cutting board. You could use a rag or a towel or anything that you like. And then I'm going to glue this or hold this into place, making sure that everything lines up. I'm going to be checking every possible angle, getting rid of any excess glue that I might have accidentally got in places that I don't want it, and then holding it in place. This is something that takes a bit of practice, and some go smoother than others. But at any rate, you're going to want to make sure you get it just right, not sticking over the edge too much, not too far to the left or too far to the right. You want to make sure that when you can close the top and the bottom, it's going to be nice and even on all four corners. Once you get it there, once you're happy with where it's sitting, you're going to, if you have it, grab some of your pieces of plywood so that you can put one inside of the box and then one on the outside of the box. Then you can use them to squish the paperboards together so that you get nice firm pressure across the entire glue flap. And then once you're happy with where this is all situated, sometimes having to make adjustments like I am right now, you're just going to hold it in place for about 5 minutes or so while the glue dries. Once you're happy with how long you've been waiting and you feel like you're ready for the next step, take out your pieces of plywood or whatever you have in there, grab your pen, and then and your stencil, and you've got to write down what the stencil size is on the bottom of your deck box, just like I'm doing right here. This is kind of a nice little thing to do because if you have several different sized deck boxes, sometimes it's easy to forget how many you can fit in each one. So by having that in there, all you have to do is look inside and then you'll know exactly what it is. Now when it comes to closing the bottom of the deck box, you're going to want to try it like this first, because sometimes the rounded flap is just a little bit too big, so you just trim off the edges ever so slightly and then try dry fitting it in again to make sure that it's going to work well. Additionally, the vertical glue flap, as you can see, is on the right hand side. So we use that little nub on the bottom there and we cut it off at an angle so that when we close this bottom in, that part that was cut off is not overlapping on the vertical glue flap. This is important because if you glue it into place that way, it sticks out inside the deck box even more, and then when you go to put your cards in there, some of them can get hung up on that and not want to go all the way inside the deck box. Once you're happy with the way everything is, Dab a bit of glue on each of those little flaps, and then once again put some more on the rounded bottom flap, making sure not to put too much on there. You want just enough to cover the surface area. Smear it around with your fingers like I'm doing here. Make sure you wipe off the excess so you're not getting glue on the outside of your deck box, and then carefully put it into place like I'm doing, wiping off any extra glue as you notice it on your fingers. Then what you want to do is make sure that the two small flaps are sitting flat inside of the deck box, and that the rounded flap is pushed up flat against the back wall of the inside of the deck box. This can be a bit of a challenge sometimes, so use whatever you have to put in there, figuring out what works best, stumbling through it like I'm doing here until you get something that works. I have different thickness pieces of plywood to use here, so I'm just trying out the different sizes until I can get the right combination to fill up the entire box, or as best as I can. This is going to help to make sure that the bottom glue flaps sit flat on top of the bottom piece of the deck box, and that the rounded flap on the bottom sits nice and flush against the back wall of the deck box. Once I've got it in there, I'm going to put pressure in every different direction that I can, making sure that all three flaps are pressed firmly where they need to be while I wait for the glue to dry. Once I get all of the pieces of plywood out, it's time to give it a final inspection. Everything's dried nice. I can check the glue joints, and then I can try dry fitting in the top. As per usual, there always seems to be a little bit that needs to be clipped off of each side in order to get the top to fit in nicely. What you can do is on your stencil, you can snip off just a little tiny bit like I'm doing there, just so that you don't have this issue theoretically with your future boxes. Then close the lid up and have a look at the entire thing. Look at all your joints, make sure everything looks nice. And if it does, you're all finished.